new cybersecurity training in psychology.
Hey, Ken. I took psychology in college, and I didn't get a very good grade in it, not as good as my cybersecurity classes. But I was kind of curious. It sounds like there's been a little kind of marriage of the two that you were looking into.
So this article focuses on some of the soft skills that they feel could be used within the cybersecurity community to better improve. It mentions incident response mainly, but I feel like in general it can be applied across the board. The article goes on to, in a few places say what the main goal is to promote a soft skill that's called cognitive readiness. And with cognitive readiness, it's often referring to, at least in the context here, how we might respond in a crisis or an incident situation. How our own internal decision-making biases can potentially constrain our way of thinking. So if we've always gone down a path that, well, if event A and event B happen, then event C will happen, and then suddenly event D happens instead of event C, how do you as a cybersecurity professional respond to that? How do you think through the problem? How do you learn to adapt to the situation? So that's effectively what they're calling as cognitive readiness. And by growing that, you can obviously then learn to adapt to more scenarios than you might potentially pick up by doing a more traditional training course, whether it's a tabletop scenario or learning about maybe a given tool or technology. So that's not to say that those tools and technologies and tabletop scenarios aren't great for acquiring skills, but they do require constant use in order to maintain those skills. So if you don't necessarily always have the time to go into some of the tabletop scenarios, by also having this cognitive readiness, you're then able to hopefully fill some of the gaps and adapt as those situations always change. I found it interesting from an incident response scenario, but I also see it as really applicable in just how we as folks who maybe think from a cybersecurity perspective can then also better understand people that we're working with who may not have a cyber or a technical background. So by better understanding not only a potential threat actor, but a peer or a coworker or someone else that we're working with, it allows us to better frame things for them, maybe not look at something from such a technical viewpoint, which I think many of us often do in this area. But the one interesting thing that the article did mention was, given our technical nature, we're always looking to measure something. What's the metric, right? So how do you measure cognitive readiness? How do you measure a soft skill like that? And it's difficult because one person's ability to learn and adapt will vary from another person's, and one person's ability to learn might be quicker than another person's. So it becomes really difficult to assess on an individual level cognitive readiness. But to me, it becomes interesting from more of a team or an organizational perspective to see how adaptive is my team to being able to respond to these varying scenarios and situations. So that's effectively the summary of cognitive readiness. And I was kind of curious for your takes on it, Kim and John, just from the perspective of, psychology isn't necessarily an area we may always think to hop into or to apply, but in some cases, understanding how we think and maybe do things is, I think, can be helpful in these types of situations.
That's interesting. Very interesting how you bring in psychology into cybersecurity. I was always interested in, hacker behavior, the behavior, how hackers think, which is why that was my portion of my dissertation. As far as how someone is portrayed, or how we look at that person, the person that we work next to. Some of our coworkers come in here in cyber without that background, and some people, or even us, may call them noobs, or they have imposter. They begin to have this imposter syndrome, right? They think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. This is not my background, or I have to fit in some kind of way, right? So it's interesting. Your article talks about that, but I see that all the time in in the chatter of hackers or newcomers to cybersecurity, whereas they have this imposter syndrome where they don't belong. And we as seasoned cybersecurity professionals, we tend to look at them in a different way as well. So I think it goes both ways. But I think that's interesting with the cognitive readiness.
Yeah, and the other thing it mentions is, obviously, I think this is something that we all try to practice, but just continual learning, not just on our technical skills, but how do we improve those other soft skills too.
Right.
And that I feel is something that we all attempt to practice, but understanding that perhaps everyone also needs to apply it is just it's good to see that it's being mentioned elsewhere.
So, this is actually something that I've thought about a bit, and I've never really solved the problem, but especially when we're doing like job interviews with people, I've always thought that, I can identify the characteristics of certain people who are really good incident responders or incident handlers in our organization, and there's certain characteristics they have. And I've always thought there's probably some sort of psychological framework you could come up with to kind of quickly assess some new candidate that you've never met this person before, but it's kind of that why are manhole covers round question of like how they critically think about solving a problem. So you can kind of say, well, maybe this person isn't the most technical person yet, but they have the right clay that I could mold, or we could mold collectively into a really good incident responder or an investigator in cybersecurity. So I do agree. I didn't get a chance to read the article in full, but I think there is a lot of opportunity in this space to kind of profile people and the characteristics that you're looking for certain traits that make a good incident handler in the cybersecurity space. So an interesting subject. One of our other team members who also does the show, Stan, he's actually come up with some interesting techniques where, people are probably familiar with capture the flag contests, which are kind of little problems, not necessarily specific to any particular company or a specific subject necessarily, but they're puzzles in a way that you're kind of have to figure out the answer to. And, through the process of that, that's also a good kind of way to triage or figure out how this person approached a problem or whether they just gave up completely. Because that stick-to-itiveness is one characteristic I tend to look for in a new candidate, somebody who doesn't give up easily. So, there's a lot of, and then again, it goes back to the psychology of it all. So interesting subject. And I think, there's a lot to be leveraged from that.